Narishma gasped and took an involuntary step. "Maintain your stance, samurai-san." Narishma teetered on a knife edge of warring compulsions, assist his champion or obey her. Gritting his teeth, he obeyed. The Ronin struck again and again, but Hotaru was as water, a flow of movement avoiding the blows. Still, Narishma began to despair at his champion's inability to seize the initiative, until abruptly she did, becoming as fire, a blur of furnace rage, but channeled by the subtlety of air. She'd been merely leading her opponent, Narishma realized, provoking his most devastating attacks, learning his moves and his counter-moves, and doing it all in a matter of seconds that had only felt like minutes. The Ronin fell back, desperately trying to fend off the whirling naginata once he found an opening and launched himself into it, but it was a feint, leaving him unbalanced and overextended. Hotaru slammed the naginata into his shoulder, cleaving him to the opposite collarbone. The Ronin toppled back in a shower of blood, mouth gaping, gasping for air that would never reach his lungs. The Crane Clan champion didn't hesitate, swinging a blow that struck off the Ronin's head. Narishma waited for his champion to stand down from the confrontation. Instead, she simply stared down at the fallen opponent. Could there be a worse injury than her arm, one he hadn't seen? He started toward Hotaru, saying, "Doji Ue, I remain at your service should you need—" "No," she said, flicking the blood from her naginata, then glancing at her injury. "I have suffered worse sparring with Toshimoko-sensei." She looked back at the caravan, then turned to Narishma. "The remaining bandits are fleeing. Retrieve the Ronin's blades, Daidoji-san, in case there is someone deserving of their return. Then, let us return to our places in the caravan and wait for it to resume its way to Otosanuchi." Narishma bowed. "Hi, Doji Ue." It is not his place to question. Still, for the rest of the trip, Narishma had to work very hard at pretending his clan champion wasn't walking only paces away. Her sister's apartment in the Imperial Palace offered a breathtaking view. The gardens below, Hotaru saw, were impeccably arranged for the season. The fuchsia glow of pink moss a brilliant contrast to the muted cream and pale purple of wisteria. The first roses were coming into bloom, yellow and crimson counterpoints. It rivaled the splendor of the gardens in the Chisei district of Otosanuchi, where the Crane Clan embassy stood. Rivaled, but certainly didn't surpass. There, a slight mismatch in the roses, a minor imbalance of color that would be missed by most samurai. Such imperfection would never be tolerated in the fantastic gardens of Kyuden Doji. But those were the exemplar for the Empire. Always emulated, but never matched. Not even here, in the Imperial City. Kyuden Doji. Hotaru touched the windowsill, but no longer saw the gardens. Instead, she saw the Crane Clan's ancestral seat of power. A palace of white stone and impeccable grace perched on cliffs overlooking the Sea of the Sun Goddess. Waves pounded ceaselessly against their rocky base, a steady, booming rhythm. The cliffs from which her mother had thrown herself. The waves that had swallowed and taken her, because her father, Doji Satsume, had driven her to it. Hotaru's grip tightened on the sill as her thoughts changed again. Doji Satsume, who had stubbornly kept the clan championship for years, even as he held the office of Emerald Champion, the Emperor's personal champion, commander of the Imperial Legions, and most senior magistrate of Rokugan. Satsume, who had only reluctantly passed the Crane Clan championship to her at the urging of his brothers-in-law, Kakita Toshimoko and Kakita Yoshi. Satsume, who was now dead, and just when the Empire needed its Emerald Champion the most. A thump from behind her. Hotaru glanced back. Framed by a pair of perfectly matched paper shoji screens, Doji Shizue fixed her cat, Fumio, with a disapproving glare over a scroll he'd knocked off a table. Leaning on her cane, Shizue returned the scroll to its place and minutely adjusted the ikebana flower arrangement the cat had apparently also disturbed. Hotaru couldn't help but smile. From the polished floor of teak from the far-off islands of spice and silk, to the matched series of sumie ink drawings decorating the walls, Shizue's apartment was impeccable. There would never be a mismatched rose blossom here. Her cane softly tapping, Shizue hobbled over to join Hotaru at the window. "What is it you see, Doji-ue?" Hotaru dissembled. "Why, the gardens, of course, resplendent under Lady Sun." Feigning disapproval, she added, "And you need not be so formal as to call me Ue, sister, not when we are alone." "If protocol becomes ingrained in the courts of the crane, Doji-ue, then in this esteemed place it becomes absolutely reflexive. In any case, is that all you see out my window?" Her smile fading, Hotaru looking back at the gardens, but this time her gaze skipped over them, over the palace wall and the cluttered rooftops of the city beyond, to the golden expanse of the distant Osari Plains. She couldn't see the crane blood spilled upon them in her clan's ongoing feud with the Lion clan, of course, but she knew it was there, drying under the late spring sun. Hotaru briefly considered just saying, "Yes, that is all," but shook her head instead. "No, I see an empire in turmoil." An attack by bandits. Even one so egregiously close to the imperial capital hardly constitutes an empire in turmoil. Hotaru touched the sleeve of her kimono, feeling the bandage beneath a white crane embroidered into the pale blue silk. A Seppun Shugenja had offered to importune the elemental water kami to speed the healing of her wound, but she'd refused. As she'd told the Daidoji soldier who'd witnessed her battle with the Ronin, she'd suffered worse injuries sparring with Kakita Toshimoko, her uncle and boisterous old sensei, and had only ever bandaged those as well. The Ronin. The man had been a criminal and had earned his death. Still, Hotaru couldn't help but understand his motivations, at least in part. 3 years ago, a devastating tsunami had ravaged the Crane clan's coastline, destroying some of the clan's most fertile lands. No one knew how long it would be before the lands would again yield rice at all, much less in the abundance for which the Crane were known. The people were hungry, and they would only get hungrier. Shizue frowned. "You are genuinely troubled, aren't you?" The Ronin who led the bandits was not entirely without honor. His intent was to secure food for his followers and their families. That is why I allowed him to die as a samurai in combat, rather than face execution as a common criminal. Well, you must give me a full accounting of it all. As storyteller to the imperial court, I am always eager for new tales to tell. This one will not only entertain the court, but also bolster your reputation." "Always the storyteller," Hotaru said, shaking her head. "Anyway, yes, I agree that a single bandit attack does not portend the doom of the empire. But when the bandits are peasants simply seeking food..." She touched the bandage again. "And famine is only one of the difficulties we face. Our disagreement with the Lion over the ownership of Toshi Ranbo drags on. I must travel there soon, in fact, to evaluate the situation for myself. To the north, the dragons seek our help in dealing with the growing sect of dissidents and heretics, but we have little to offer them. To the south, the crab are badly pressed on the Carpenter Wall, but we have little help to offer there either, and with each passing day the scorpion grip on the imperial court grows tighter." Hotaru made herself stop. "But then, there are always problems afflicting the empire, aren't there?" Perhaps I am simply not yet used to my role as clan champion. Hotaru swept her naginata through the final movements of the kata called the one-strike blade, then stopped, assuming a resting stance. Kokita Toshimoko nodded from there, and he stood beneath the nearby sakura tree, opening his mouth to offer something, but Doji Satsume spoke first, cutting him off. "That was very good, my daughter." Hotaru bowed. "Thank you, father." "Do not thank me," Satsume said, his face stone. "Very good is merely a guest house on the road to perfection, a place to visit briefly, not to stay. You, Hotaru, seem to have made it your home. Someday you will lead our clan. If that leadership is merely very good, then you will have failed." That had been a year and a half ago? So, only a few months before Satsume had stepped down as clan champion, elevating Hotaru in his place. She had never heard him comment on the quality of her leadership of the Cranes since, not even to say if it was very good. And now he was dead. "If I may be so bold," Shizue said, "I would agree that your newness to the position may be an issue. Take your arrival here. As exciting as it turned out, why in the world were you traveling with that caravan in the first place, rather than with the official entourage to which you are due, and in secret at that?" "Thanks to the bandits, it's not much of a secret now, is it?" Hotaru said, waving a dismissive hand. "I simply wish to arrive in Otosan Uchi discreetly, to gain some time to learn what I could about Satsume's death before the inevitable fanfare caught up with me. A bold, even rash thing to do, certainly not something father would have done, which is why I suspect you attempted it." Hotaru just looked out the window. "Well," Shizue went on, "you would have just run headlong into the Emerald Magistrates in their investigation regardless. The death of the Emerald Champion is no small matter." "Perhaps, but it does not matter now, does it? I have no choice now but to accept whatever the official sources are prepared to share." Shizue sniffed and made a fractional adjustment to another ikebana arrangement, this one near the window. "There is still somewhat less than official sources available, one of whom is standing right in front of you. The most important skill of a storyteller is the ability to listen, after all." "Very well. What has this less than official source heard?" "That Satsume's death remains a complete mystery. He appears to have simply died. That has, of course, led to all sorts of speculation among the rumor mongers, such as, some say the fortunes simply decreed it was his time to return to the karmic wheel. Others suggest more nefarious causes." Hotaru narrowed her eyes. "This is not one of your stories, Shizue. The dramatic flair is unnecessary." Shizue smiled and minutely adjusted the ikebana again. "Something else that has become ingrained, I'm afraid. Anyway, some suggest his death was neither natural nor accidental, and now the Emerald Championship is available for those who might covet it. If that is the finding of the arrangements, then a price will be demanded in blood, not least by our brother." Hotaru sighed. "Indeed. Kuwanan-kun certainly has not felt the need to wait for the magistrate's findings. He is already demanding blood in the name of our clan's honor." Shizue leaned on her cane. "Lord Satsume was our father. I suspect family honor also fuels his outrage." She cocked her head. "As I would expect it does yours." Hotaru turned back to the window. "The death of Doji Satsume, Emerald Champion, is indeed a grave matter. His death is a great loss to the Empire, and if it does turn out he was murdered, then yes, there will be blood, a great deal of it. Perhaps there will even be war." She looked down into the garden. The death of Doji Satsume, our father, however. She paused, her gaze on a koi pond surrounded by colorful hibiscus. Perhaps that is simply justice finally done. A long moment passed. Finally, Shizue said, "Our mother's death, in the end, was her own choice. A choice she should never have been forced to make." Hotaru snapped, turning. "Father might as well have pushed her off that cliff himself." A soft tap at the door interrupted her. Shizue gave Hotaru a puzzled look, then hobbled past the shoji screens to the door. She opened it to see a servant who immediately bowed to the floor, then moved aside, letting someone else enter. Hotaru's breath caught as she recognized the new arrival, Bayushi Kachiko, Imperial Advisor of Rokugan, and the most beautiful woman in the Empire. Fighting the desire to smile, to rush at Kachiko and embrace her, Hotaru simply bowed. So did Shizue, but more deeply as befit her status relative to that of the woman who advised the Emperor himself. At the same time, both automatically assumed a perfect facade of formality. "Bayushi Kachiko dono," Hotaru said. "What a pleasant surprise. To what do we owe the honor of a visit from the esteemed Imperial Advisor?" Kachiko, a crimson and black study in sinuous charm, returned their bows. "How could I not pay my respects to the honored champion of the Crane clan upon her arrival in the imperial capital?" Pausing to admire one of Shizue's ikebana arrangements, she let her fingers brush a sprig of gardenia, whose meaning in Hanakotoba, the language of flowers, was secret love. "It would appear, however, that there has been a significant breach of protocol, for which I must profusely apologize on behalf of the Imperial Court. We were given no proper notification of your coming to Odasanuchi, much less of you having actually arrived." "It is not a matter of concern," Hotaru said. Kachiko's eyes glinted through the minimal mask that framed them, leaving the rest of her features, as fine as delicate porcelain, exposed. "Nonsense. Rest assured that appropriate corrective action will be taken so that in the future you shall receive the recognition to which a clan champion is entitled." Each of the scorpion's movements was deliberate and calculated even as she spoke. From a kimono slit to reveal almost scandalous glimpses of her legs as she walked, to a head tilted just enough to expose a barely appropriate amount of shoulder. Bayushi Kachiko was all about effect, and that effect was the seductive promise of more. Hotaru glanced at her sister. "Shizue-san, if I may presume your hospitality, would you allow us the use of your apartments for a brief time?" "Of course, Doji Ue. It gives me an excuse to enjoy the gardens before the setting of Lady Sun. Fumio-chan, do not give our guests any trouble." The cat blinked back at Shizue, then knocked a writing brush onto the floor. Shizue sighed, then bowed, turned, and walked out of the room, sliding the door closed behind her. Hotaru and Kachiko maintained their air of courtly propriety for a moment after Shizue had gone, then broke into warm smiles. Kachiko stepped forward, taking Hotaru's hands in hers and opening her mouth to speak. Before she could, though, Hotaru pulled her closer, meaning to kiss her. She hesitated at a stray thought of her husband, now on his way to Shizuka Toshi to learn what he could about a recent attack by pirates, and about the man Yoritomo who led them. Stopping herself, Hotaru simply looked into Kachiko's dark eyes instead. A silent moment passed. "My heart," Hotaru thought. Surely Kachiko can hear it beating, so hard and quickly. Kachiko finally broke the silence. "So, Hotaru, what is the meaning of sneaking into this city? Truly." Kachiko put on an exaggerated look of mock suspicion. "Were you trying to avoid me?" "Of course not. I merely was hoping to have some time to myself, before all of the inevitable ceremony wrapped around me like suffocating silk. Kachiko released Hotaru's hands. And why would you do that? It was Hotaru's turn to be mischievous. Offering a coy smile, she said, Well, perhaps rather than trying to avoid you, I wanted some quiet time to spend with you. An eyebrow lifted over the top of Kachiko's mask. That can certainly be arranged. In fact, you must allow me to host you this evening. I have procured some sake from Ryoko Owaritoshi that will make even one so discerning as the leader of the Crane clan jealous. I look forward to it. A moment passed, and then Kachiko drew back, her manner becoming more formal. While it flatters me to think you were skulking your way into Otosan Uchi just to spend some time with me, that is not the reason for your somewhat unwarranted discretion, is it? I think you were hoping to take advantage of the relative anonymity, however brief, to learn some unornamented truths about Lord Satsume's death. An obvious plan, then, and apparently not a very good one. On the contrary, had you not involved yourself in an unseemly fight with bandits on the road, you might have gotten away with it. Hotaru gave Kachiko, the woman known as the Mistress of Secrets, a wry look. Really? For a time, I may eventually come to know everything of note that goes on in this city, but eventually isn't instantly. Kachiko's expression became grave. As for Lord Satsume, you have my deepest condolences, Hotaru. He was a great man and an honored and loyal servant of the Empire. He will be missed. Hotaru wanted to appear to be appropriately grief-stricken, but she could only see the cliffs near Kyuden Doji. He will be missed, was all she finally managed to say. Kachiko's eyes narrowed at Hotaru's flat tone. I am no stranger to problematic relationships with one's father, but if I may be presumptuous, Lord Satsume is dead, Hotaru. I would hate to see your bitterness toward him outlive him, at least for very long. Hotaru looked at one of Shizoe's shoji screens depicting mountains stark against a red sunset. I do not deny my bitterness, but it is more than that. The circumstances around his death are troubling. Yes. I understand that the Emerald Magistrates continue their investigation. Perhaps the secrecy of your arrival had some benefit after all, and you have heard something I have not? Hotaru turned her gaze on Fumio the cat, who had settled himself on a tatami mat near the ink brush he'd vanquished. Were this not Bayushi Kachiko, Hotaru might have thought she was actually concerned she had missed something, or that she might be worried something was in the process of being discovered that wasn't meant to be. But this was Kachiko. So it was inconceivable that she wouldn't know exactly what the Emerald Magistrates had found so far. Some suggest that his death was neither natural nor accidental, and that now the Emerald Championship is available for those who might covet it. Kachiko's brother, Hametsu, daimyo of the Shosuru family, was reputed to be a master of poisons, more than capable of making it appear that someone had simply died. And while there was little love lost between him and Kachiko, that they were both loyal to their clan was beyond question. And with each passing day, the scorpion grip on the imperial court grows ever tighter. Hotaru looked up from the cat to find Kachiko watching her. No, Hotaru finally said. I have heard nothing aside from the stray bits of gossip. Like everyone else, I can only wait for the Emerald Magistrates to complete their investigation. A pause. Then, Kachiko nodded. Of course. In the meantime, do you intend to remain in the capital? For the time being. There is a funeral to prepare. I had originally thought to have it at Kyuden Doji, but I think it would be more appropriate for it to be here in Orasanuchi. An appropriate choice indeed. If there is anything I can do to assist, you need but ask. Hotaru took Kachiko's hand in hers. Thank you. That means a great deal to me. Kachiko placed her other hand over Hotaru's. Now, I would love to stay, but I'm afraid I have matters of court to attend to. I do expect to see you this evening, though. Hotaru wanted nothing more than to be with Kachiko now, but she simply nodded. Of course. Then I shall send a servant with the details. Until then. Kachiko held Hotaru's hand in hers a moment longer, then released it and turned to the door. She and Hotaru exchanged appropriate bows, and then she was gone. For a while, Hotaru simply stared at the door. Eventually, she turned and walked back to the window. The play of light and shadow in the garden had changed with the movement of Lady Sun, making it seem a completely different place. Again, though, her gaze was drawn beyond it, to the horizon. Rice fields, fallow and empty, blood upon the Osari plains, darkness pounding on the carpenter wall, heresy and sedition. If Rokugan was the Emerald Empire, then the Emerald was flawed. Small cracks threatening to lengthen, to widen, to cause the whole of it to crumble to fragments and dust. The Price of War by Mary Murdock. Some weeks later in contested territory, Matsusuko crouched within a thick copse of trees, waiting in ambush with nearly a dozen other units of Lion Clan samurai. The dense foliage hushed the screams and steel clanging of the fighting below, but nothing could rid the air of the raw iron smell of blood. The scent tickled her into a fury, her legs itching to spring, to attack. She eyed her commander, Okoro Toturi, but the smoothness of his face betrayed no hint of his strategy as he watched the battle from afar. What is he waiting for? Suko's contingent had arrived nearly an hour ago, ready to reinforce the dwindling forces of Okoro Arasou, the Lion Clan champion, in the territory dispute with the Crane Clan. In an act of insolence, the Crane had bolstered their occupying forces in Toshiranbo, the northernmost lion city, to force a lion army away from the contested grain-laden Osari plains in the south. Arasou had been campaigning at the foot of the city for several weeks, building siege weapons and needing reinforcements, only to make his final push to retake the city and ensure the Crane could not use it as a staging ground against them. Arasou's older brother, Toturi, had been summoned from the monastery to answer that call for aid, yet why does he hesitate? A small Crane contingent sped past their hiding place, bearing torches, intending to sneak behind Arasou's forces and set fire to their battering rams. She clutched her katana and waited for Toturi's signal fan to herald the charge. However, he remained still. What are we waiting for? Suko hissed, the heat of her blood curling her fingers tighter around her katana. Her fists shook. The crane are right there. Toturi did not answer, merely lifting his fan parallel to the earth, the sign to wait. Suko turned away in disgust, shifting her attention to her comrades in arms, their anticipation as palpable as her own. Down the line, Matsu Gohei grinned, unnervingly jovial in the face of danger as ever. Just behind her, Kitsu Motso's boots creaked as he fidgeted, likely attempting to figure out what Toturi was thinking. As if thinking works, she glared at Toturi again. Weakling. Ariso wouldn't wait on a sly calculation. Victory is only moments away! Suko strained to see Ariso in the faraway skirmish. The fiery gold glint of Ariso's helmet caught her eye as he sliced through a crane Ashigaru in a single stroke. The crane's shoulder and head parted, and Ariso powered through the gap straight into another crane warrior, smashing into his face with a fierce blow and bellowing in a ferocious battle cry. Suko's place was by his side, fighting toward victory, not hiding in a thicket like a shy mule with a cowardly master. Despite Arisou's ferocity, the torch-bearing crane had proved enough of a distraction to pull the lion from the city's walls. In that moment, a deluge of crane spearmen poured through the gates, crashing into the forces at Arisou's back like a blue wave over golden sand. Screams shook the sky as the spearman line slammed into the lion's troops, dividing them from their battering rams. Arisu signaled for a regrouping retreat, and the lion samurai fell back, running past the trees of Toturi's hiding place with the crane spearmen in furious pursuit. "Toturi!" Suko hissed, as the lion and crane armies passed by, but Toturi still did not flinch, merely watching. She raised an arm as if to strike him, but Mozo snatched at her elbow. "Patience, Suko-sama," Motso muttered, struggling to keep his grip on her arm as she wrenched it from his grasp. "Our commander is waiting for the crane momentum to swing past recovery." Suddenly, Toturi flicked his fan, signaling the charge. Battle cries rang from the forest as the lion reinforcements burst from the trees, finally joining the fray. They caught the crane in a tight pincer attack as Ariso, seeing the fresh lion troops, pressed his forces hard in retaliation. Suko cut her way through the battle to where Ariso slashed through 3 crane Ashigaru, making short work of them despite his battle fatigue. "You're late!" he boomed to Suko, smiling. Crane blood and dust spattered all over his handsome face. He spun with dexterous footwork to counter a nimble crane samurai slash at his throat, finishing him with a swift strike. "Your brother was hesitating!" she yelled over the clashing steel, deftly slicing through a crane samurai who stumbled too close to her. The body fell with a heavy crunch, and she leapt over him toward a crane who danced around Motso, threatening to take off his head with her graceful kata. Suko crashed into her, disrupting the pretentious fluidity of the crane fighting style and landing a killing blow. "Toturi-kun thinks too much," Arisu laughed, leaping forward to meet 2 more crane Ashigaru in their frantic attempts to regain the upper hand. "I always tell him that." "That's why you're the clan champion instead of him," she called back, turning to face a spry crane samurai in blue lacquered armor. Suko charged, challenging the graceful agility of the crane with a violent thrust. Despite Suko's superior strength, the crane's deft spins and parries deflected all of the blows away, and his armor mitigated the power of her strikes. A quick cut sliced across her arm, her shoulder, her side, her face, but she smiled despite the pain. "We are the teeth of the lion." Suko hurled forward to crowd her opponent's defensive stance, overpowering it with brute ferocity. With a loud cry, Suko slashed at a weak spot at his throat, and he fell to the ground. Drum beats sounded from atop the walls of Toshi Ranbo, and the crane responded with a retreat. Suko wheeled around to find Arisobu again, ready for orders to pursuit, but Toturi had gotten to his brother first. Suko ran to catch the last of their exchange. Siege would be better, Toturi insisted, again the calmness of his face clashing with the violence of the scene. If we take the city by force, so you admit that should we pursue, we would take it, Arisu said, his handsome brow furrowing. The odds are now on our side. Thanks to that pincer attack, we have seriously depleted their forces. All we need to do is push. The gates are open. Today we regain what is rightfully ours. Toturi's mouth twisted in seriousness, and he stretched his full height as if trying to play the older brother. Taking it by force would spark an all-out war with the Crane, and turn the Emperor's favor against us. Through siege, we can hope the Crane will surrender to save face and avoid a slaughter. Suko pounced forward. Hope for surrender? What kind of lion are you? She snarled. Trust your instincts, Arisobu-sama. Remember, those who attack first shall win. This is our path to victory. A siege has no glory, and hope cannot win us the city. Arisobu locked eyes with Suko, pride blazing in his gaze. He smiled. Her heart burned. Lady Suko agrees with me, Toturi-san. With her advice, I shall lead our final charge towards the city. Toshi Ranbo will be ours! With a powerful arm, he signaled his banners. The lion forces, united under their champion, fell into disciplined ranks, ready for the charge. Suko and Toturi joined the lions on either side of Arisobu. To victory! He shouted, taking a last look at Toturi, then at Suko, before charging after the retreating Crane. Suko raced toward Toshi Ranbo, her heart swelling as her brothers and sisters of the lion rushed to overtake the foe. Arisobu and his elite swordsmen bounded toward the Crane in fierce strides, overtaking the first of their prey in moments. With a mighty leap, he crashed down upon the back of a large Crane spearman, knocking him to the ground. He tumbled forward to knock the legs out from under another retreating Crane before springing into the air to again smash down upon another. Suko veered to the right to cut her own path toward Toshi Ranbo's gates. She stabbed at one Crane, who tripped another with his falling body. Suko hurled herself at them, finishing them quickly. Her katana lodged deep in the lacquered folds of a breastplate, so she kicked at it to wrench her sword free again. She regained her pace. Just 300 more paces to the gate. Victory is upon us! A flash of blue and white emerged from Toshi Ranbo. Doji Hotaru, the Crane clan champion, appeared with a small body of archers to provide covering fire for the fleeing Crane. They let fly a volley, raining death down upon the gaining lion. Two zipped past Suko's face, so she darted toward the gate to find shelter from the hail of arrows. She leapt over several mangled Crane bodies that marked Arisobu's ferocious path ahead of her. She managed a glimpse of the top of his shining helmet. Suko sped forward to catch up to him. She could hear his battle cries, which swelled her with the passion of battle. He raged through the Crane ranks, slashing through the blue bodies on either side of him, leaves before a tempest. He was a mere 200 paces from the gate. Suko could see Hotaru's face contorted in fear as the raging force approached. The Crane champion's eyes glistened with tears. "Victory!" Suko cried. "Arisobu will lead us to victory!" As Suko drew closer, however, the look on Hotaru's face became clear. It was not fear, it was sorrow. The Crane clan champion drew back her bowstring in a long, graceful pull and let an arrow fly. Her bolt sped like lightning straight into Arisobu's chest. The Lion Clan champion didn't break pace. Suko shoved through the thong, trying to clear a path to Arisobu, but a few dozen Crane Ashigaru still crowded the way, ramming her in all directions. She dropped her katana and pushed back against the bodies. Another arrow flew from Hotaru's bow. The arrowhead slammed through the back of Arasowu's helmet with a sickening snap. His momentum slowed, and he tumbled forward onto the earth. Tsuko screamed, but she could not hear the sound. Silence shuddered through her body, her stomach, her throat, her heart. Numbness spread down her limbs. Her legs shook, barely holding her up as she stumbled. Eventually, after an eternal moment, she stood over what was once the greatest samurai in the Lion Clan. She fell to her knees, choking as her lungs stiffened, every part of her trembling in disbelief. "No!" She clutched at his shoulder, her hands trembling too fiercely to lift him. "This is a dream! A nightmare!" Toturi rushed to her side and heaved Arasowu over. Hotaru's arrow stuck out of his eye, reddish water welling up its shaft, spilling into the other clear, open eye that saw nothing. Shivering, Tsuko turned from Arasowu's dead gaze to Toturi. But he did not notice her. With his jaw clenched, the only sign of his pain, he stared at Hotaru. The white-haired samurai wiped away her tears before fleeing with the remaining crane back into Toshi Ranbo, the gates closing behind them. The silence broke. The chaos of the battlefield flooded back over Tsuko, moans of the wounded and dying, crimson, spattering blue and brown alike. Motso approached, Arasowu's fallen katana in hand. Crane blood still dripped from its blade, staining Arasowu's golden armor. "Lord Toturi," Motso whispered, his gentle voice cracking. He turned the ancestral hilt toward the bereaved brother. "As oldest living heir of Akodo One-Eye, you are now clan champion." Tsuko shut her eyes and blindly reached out to grasp Arasowu's gloved hand. It was still hot. "War!" Tsuko roared, slamming her fist onto the table, scattering maps and troop markers onto the ground. Toturi clenched his teeth, reading the faces of the other Lion Clan samurai assembled in the war pavilion like a tragic story. Their faces flickered in the firelight, sorrow deepening the lines of their frowns. Kitsu Motso fidgeted, unable to make eye contact with Tsuko or Toturi. Matsu Agatoki's wrinkled mouth lengthened into a grimace. Toturi turned back to Tsuko. Hers was the only face that wore rage, pure, seething rage. "War against the crane!" Tsuko repeated, the harshness of her voice slamming into the others as though to batter them into submission. "Today's losses should not go unpunished. It is an insult to our clan. It's the price of battle." Agatoki growled. The old lion glared at her. "Our clan, above all, should know this price, and the further cost we should pay for an all-out war with the crane." "The Emperor will not look kindly on an illegal declaration," Motso mumbled. "Arasowu chose to attack the crane. The crane can claim they were defending themselves, so we cannot seek immediate vengeance for our champion's death. We must go through the proper channels." "More waiting?" Tsuko spat. "Toturi, stop behaving as a simpering child and act. Seek retribution, reclaim Toshi Ranbo, the Osari Plains, and more from those thieving murderers. Make them cower for their insults. Think of our clan's honor. You are clan champion now. What will you do?" Their stares demanded an answer. He was now champion. He whom his clan had once passed over for his younger, stronger, more powerful brother, Arasowu. What will I do? 1,000 pathways opened up before him, choices. So many choices. Arasowu, death, the Emperor, the Empire, Hotaru. Each road through his mind branched a dozen ways like a river, like a bursting star. He followed each strand in an instant, discovering the plots, gauging the people and their actions, inserting uncertain figures, each dangerous, each a risk. Revenge? War. He began counting the bodies, the true costs it would demand. Damn you, Toturi! Suko yelled, scattering his thoughts. You coward! You are not worthy of leading us as champion. You are passed over for your lack of martial skill. You are a mockery of our ways. Silence, Suko-sama! Agatoki thundered, his hand snapping to his katana. Your insubordination is a grievous error in discipline. Okoto Ue is now in command and... Stop! Toturi shouted, towering over the lion samurai before him, his brow wrinkled in seriousness, but he set a calm hand upon the table. Agatoki-san, I thank you for upholding our ways, discipline, honor, and decorum, but lion voices shall never be silenced. Suko-san has a right to speak, especially in this time of grief and heartbreak. Suko's eyes narrowed in steely wrath. How dare you? She whispered, her voice sharp like a knife. She marched out of the pavilion. Agatoki shook his head in shame, lowering his hand from his sword. Fool. Lady Suko's ways are unbecoming of the Matsu family daimyo. Agatoki-san, Toturi replied, you know full well that the Matsu are born and bred to fight for any cause they find just. Do not hold this against her. As an Okoto, I must take this responsibility to lead even the wildest. He turned from the council to stare into the fire, hoping it would illuminate the correct path through the labyrinth of his thoughts, but the signposts were illegible in the darkness. Finally, he spoke. I shall not make decisions until I have spoken to the clan generals and other family daimyo. I will also seek counsel from the emperor. Send messengers to the palace in Otosan Uchi, informing him of my brother's death. Motsu-sama, you will ride to Yoja no Shiro and prepare the funeral rites for Arisu-sama. I will have Suko-sama follow to deliver the body. She will not want to go, Motsu said. Duty rides before us, Toturi said, lowering his head in reverence. He was her betrothed, and this is her last obligation to him. Motsu bowed and left the tent. Agatoki remained a moment, standing by the door, a full head and shoulders shorter than his new champion, but still straight and proud in his carriage. Okoto Ue, he said, resting a strong, calloused hand on his shoulder. Your time has come. You know the Okoto ways, but a lion is more than his roar, more than his mane, more than his teeth, more than his heart. A lion is all of these. Suko-sama was right to ask what you will do, because now all of the lion clan families look to you to act as one. Toturi nodded. I'm afraid with my brother's loss, a schism is inevitable. Suko-san's rage will poison many against me. And as clan champion, you must not let that divide us. Never. Agatoki bowed and vanished into the night. Toturi wandered back to the fallen maps and troop markers. He picked them up in several armfuls and set them back on the table in a heap. The wooden lion figurine had a leg broken off. This is a mess, isn't it? He picked up the figure and touched the amputated stump. My mess. Toturi spied the map of Toshiranbo on top of the pile. The paper crumpled into crooked plains and false mountains. Once again, the threads of pathway started to appear. He could see Suko's rage swerving off into the distance towards an avenger's fire. He saw the Emperor's polite, bloodless answer to the news of Arisu's death. Hotaru-san killed my brother today. Those words burst unexpectedly from a thick dam in his mind. With a gasp, Toturi crushed the lion figure to splinters and squeezed until his fingers were numb. Slowly, he opened his palm, and there lay a lifeless wooden lion. Drops of blood welled around the bone-like slivers where they had pierced his skin. My brother, Arisu. A rustling at the door roused him. Toturi turned to see Motsu standing there. A message, Okoto Ue. he said, a little winded as if he had just run across the camp. From Champion Doji Hotaru. He held out a delicate white scroll with a silvery seal upon it. Toturi took it and nodded before Motso bowed and ran out. The paper was scented with plum blossoms, symbolizing all at once perseverance, hope, and the transitoriness of life. Elegant calligraphy curled over its surface. To the Lion Clan champion, Okoto Toturi. He broke the seal. Okoto Toturi, brother-in-arms, friend of my heart, and now Lion Clan champion. I write in the heat of this sorrowful night as the sun sets upon an era for your clan. Okoto Arasou Dono was the best of your clan, a noble warrior whose life called down the pride of your ancestors from the heavens. He was an admirable foe, and the flowery crane diplomacy and social obligation melted in a pause of the brush strokes. I know you are too strong to admit your pain. However, if my own soul can